We're taking a bit of a turn on today's episode. Well, actually, every episode. But today, we're discussing the effects of a best friend divorce when the wounds are still fresh and healing is slow to start. Hey everyone, my name is Shauna, and I'm a licensed social worker, practicing therapist, and restorative justice practitioner, and I'll be your host. Welcome to the Best Friend Divorce Podcast. Thank you for being here and giving us your time and space and attention. And just a reminder, if you're interested in bloopers, additional content, and behind the scenes clips, you can check us out on social media at BF Divorce Pod on Instagram and X, formerly known as Twitter. And you can support us from the beginning by joining the divorce party on our Patreon. Even though we have folks from different walks of life who are at different points in their BFD journey, it's important to hear from folks who are also at the beginning stages of their own healing, and not just the people that are like, I'm good, I'm over it. I just want us to have compassion for how difficult the journey would be and the feelings that it could bring up when you share your pain with the world while you're still navigating it. Anger is a powerful emotion, and if we let it, it can become a righteous catalyst for our healing. And just a quick note on this, we see how anger is being transmuted into righteousness on campuses nationwide. Students are building encampments and occupying buildings to help bring awareness to the genocide of the Palestinian people in Gaza. On this show, it is and always will be Free Palestine. But I digress. There's something to learn here about our internal struggles for healing and the fight for the constitution of ourselves, namely when we walk away from unhealthy relationships. So, Uncle Jimmy, aka James Baldwin, once told us the betrayal of a belief is not the same thing as ceasing to believe. We can use the anger of betrayal to let go of a friendship, but it's not the same thing as ceasing to believe that good and healthy friendships, relationships are accessible to you. With that, let's dive into our chat with Vileti, a proud social worker, shout out to the group workers, who is committed to racial and social justice, equitable change, world travel, hello, and good times. She's brilliant in how she holds space for folks and also centers her own humanity for balance in a very fucked up world. However, she too is navigating her own BFD that begs the question, can you still heal while having connections to an ex-bestie? Let's find out. Hey, Vileti.
Hello.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes, welcome to the Best Friend Divorce Podcast. We spent some time here talking about how people heal from it or how have they not healed from it, and even spend some time doing a little bit of introspection of like how we may have contributed to the rupture in some way so that it's not always as one-sided and we get an opportunity to grow. So thank you so much for being here today. I would love to start by asking you to talk a little bit about yourself and who you are and who are your people and all of the things that has brought you here today.
Whew. Oh my. Well, first off, thank you again for having me. Secondly, I don't know if I've told you this already, but I really love the name of this podcast because I feel like it goes really, really high and then it's like best friend divorce though. Like this is where we're talking about this taboo thing.
Yes.
It's almost like oxymoronic. So I really like the name of your podcast. Who am I? I'm just like, oh my gosh, I don't know why this question is overwhelming, but I'm just going to go with what came to my gut. And one of one of my favorite roles is being an aunt. I am an auntie to a number of nieces and nephews, as you and I have had many of conversations about these nibblings, both young and old, because there are two camps of them. But my background is in social work. I am a licensed clinician in New York City. I reside in the South Bronx, better known as Lenape Land. I'm originally from Oakland. If you don't know, you can't go. And yeah, I'm from the Bay Area, and I feel like anybody from the Bay Area really reps the Bay Area hard. So I'm a Cali girl. I've been living here in New York for a minute. I came out here for social work school. And like many other transplants, I ended up still being here. I messed
Mhm.
around and met my partner, and you know how that goes. Here, I'm still here. So I'll pause it there. There's so many things that you can say about yourself, but I was like, I'll just let the ones that organically come to me that I cherish. Yeah.
Mhm. That was good. I like that. So, in addition to talking a little bit about like who you are, I would love just for our listeners to get a glimpse into your best friend divorce. So, talk to us a little bit about what happened. If you want to start, a great place to start could be like, how did you even meet this person? What attracted you or drew them to you or drew you to them? And how did that blossom into being a friendship?
So me and my ex-best friend met in college. I went to UCLA, and we met during the summer program. It was like one of those summer bridge programs for low income, first generation students of color, Black and Brown students.
Mhm.
And so both her and I were students in this summer program, and we met each other. And I remember just feeling really connected to her because we were both from the Bay. Well, actually, no, I can't believe I just said that she's from the Bay, because this was actually a running joke because she's from Sacramento. And if anyone is from NorCal or from California, that Sacramento is absolutely not the Bay. And she wasn't one of those people who would try to claim that Sacramento was the Bay, but she's from Sacramento, and my background is Tongan American, so I'm Pacific Islander, and she had some friends and knew of Pacific Islander folks, and so that was like some natural connections. And then we just kind of sort of started vibing. Like we had a shared class as well. Now that I remember, we had our English class together,
Mm,
and I didn't know nobody here at this school. She didn't really know anybody, and we were both very social, very talkative. Didn't have like any issues in the socializing, making friends department.
mm,
And then no, we didn't live on the same floor, but we lived in the same building during that summer. And she came from a big family. I came from a big family. I think we were just noticing similarities in our personality and how we liked to like make friends and relate to other folks and connect. And yeah, that's how I met her. And what actually happened, I don't even know where to start. But I'm just going to try and summarize it, or not summarize it, but what I remember being at the core of the conflict.
mm,
That was the straw that broke the camel's back, was miscommunication, like a really long lapse of time without communication. It was all centered around, I think, what was at the core. If it was like an umbrella overarching theme, it was like miscommunication, and then a
mm,
bunch of different branches that kind of broke off around that piece. But it was at the height of the pandemic. She, like many other people during the pandemic, was furloughed from her job. I worked at the time in social services as a direct supervisor, and for a small team trying to get struggling New Yorkers linked to a number of different social service supports.
mm.
And she had reached out to me to help her sign up for unemployment.
Okay.
And the way I remember is, I think too much time had passed when she reached out to me, that for me to follow up with her. So it had been a while since I had followed up with her when she first asked me to help her fill out for unemployment, because if we remember the height of the pandemic, those were dark times. Those were like
Yeah.
very unpredictable. Like, so time was not real for me. I didn't stop working at all. I was trying to get my team to go from in person to what it meant to work virtually and from home. And she had sent me a text message, and she said something along the lines of like radio silence. And I read that as like, hello, I asked you for help. I haven't heard from you. So then I apologized and was like, so sorry, just trying to get my team up and running, yada, yada, yada. And then things got real weird real quick. It was one of those, I had no idea that she was feeling a type of way, because when I had texted her, I said, what actual, how do you actually want me to help you sign up for unemployment? Because separately in my mind, and I don't know if this is like an okay assumption to make, but separately in my mind, I'm like, you're degreed up, like signing up for unemployment, you literally just go to the website, you fill out the application, and you sign up. So I had assumed, or I guess I just expected that this is something that she wouldn't need help with. And I guess the way that I responded to her there, because I had asked the question, I asked her, like, can you just clarify what type of help do you need? Because it's really simple. You just go online and and that's when she responded in like, she was defensive. So I was confused by her defensiveness. And then she brought up another piece about like, oh, well, there's actually some things that I want to talk to you about. I have been feeling really unsupported. And these were sent to me in voice notes. At that time, I was not a voice note girly. I didn't care for them. I didn't like listening to them. So I remember listening to it, but responding via text. And it was weird to me that she had enough time to share voice notes with me. And then as I'm trying to have the conversation, she tells me, actually, let's like schedule time to actually talk about these things that are coming up for me. These things that I have no idea about. I had no idea that there was things coming up for her or that she was feeling unsupported from me. I didn't know what she even meant by like feeling unsupported. And then we had scheduled a time to talk. When that time came, I remember calling her, she didn't answer. Then she called me back on FaceTime and she was with her sister. And I remember like I don't know why this feels kind of like, oh my gosh, you're like revealing, you're like exposing yourself. But like I can get real mad real fast. I had a temper. So I just remember seeing her sister and being like, WTF. Like I hope I masked it. At this point, I really don't give a shit. But I remember just being like so confused because we're like in this weird, icky space. Why are you calling me while you're with your sister if we're supposed to be having a quote unquote conversation?
Right.
And so she calls me on FaceTime with her sister. It feels a little awkward for me. We have a few words and she tells me, I'm going to call you back when I get home while I'm cooking. Hours go by. She doesn't call me back, but I get a text message from her and she said, I'm still cooking. Looks like it's not going to happen for me. Can we reschedule? So we rescheduled again.
Okay.
And then closer to the second time that we rescheduled, I get another text message from her. And she says, I actually would rather have this conversation in person. And to be honest, at this point, I was just growing more and more frustrated because I didn't understand what the hell was going on. And I felt like I was being dragged around, like being given the runaround. And then when I said, well, when do you think you're going to be in California? Because she was one of those people at the height of the pandemic. She was just like not wanting to be in New York like everybody else, trying to find other places to go and escape. And so she was in California. And so she was saying, I want to have this conversation in person. When I asked her, well, when do you think you're actually going to be in person? She didn't have an answer. So again, my frustration just kept growing and growing. And then essentially that was it. That was the beginning of the end. Months passed by. I got a random text message from her saying like, hey, I haven't heard from you. And this text message, I remember again, was very enraging because it was almost like, hey, I haven't heard from you. But what do you mean I haven't heard from you? Like you were supposed to let me know when you were back in California. And I almost went into a past Twitter finger version of myself, but I held it. I went to therapy. I was like, I can't believe I'm talking about this shit in therapy. But I guess where else? If I can't talk about this anywhere else, why not in therapy?
Right.
And so my therapist helped me like really just hold space for my feelings and process while I was like feeling so many ways. And I drafted a text message to her and was just like, I try to be as objective as possible. I was just like, hey, it's really good to hear from you. You're right. We haven't spoken in a few months, if my memory serves me correctly. You were supposed to let me know when you were back in California so we could reconnect. And then I offered up days and times that I was available to connect.
Mm-hmm.
And then I never heard from her again. And that was in 2021.
Okay.
Was that 2021? Yeah, I think. Or is it 2020? No, I think it was 2020, because then a year, like out of nowhere, I would get a text message from her, or like her grandmother passed away and I'm still connected to, we have a lot of mutual friends, right? And so a mutual friend reached out and was like, so and so's grandma passed away. Let me know if you want to like contribute and things like that. And I had to talk about that in therapy too, because I felt phony and weird, like contributing, but I also am like not one of those people. Like I knew how close she was with her grandmother. She's her grandmother's namesake. Like we've known each other for so long. Our families also knew of each other's families.
Mm.
So I remember sending her like a text message. That's what felt I could do within my capacity, that felt genuine to me. And then I think another year passed by. The last time I heard from her was in April of this year. And it was in true retrograde fashion, because it was during Mercury retrograde.
Mm.
And she is an ex-friend.
Mm.
And to be completely honest, it felt like no time had changed, in terms of like, you are still the same person. Like she formed the text message as if nothing ever happened and was like, let me know if you're open to a conversation, because I'm open to a conversation. But if you're not, I totally understand. But, peace and love. And my reaction was definitely not as enraged as I was before, because I've grown since then.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it still stands. She's still an ex.
Mm.
And the best response is no response. So I never responded.
Mm.
The end. That was a lot, but I was just like, let me just get all of this out.
No, not at all. Sometimes it just rolls and it happens like that. And I let people do their thing. It's what's comfortable for them. First of all, thank you for sharing that because I'm curious, like, was that always like a pattern in the friendship where maybe she would like, have you seen this pattern before, at
Mhm.
any point during your friendship, or did this just emerge as a brand new thing at the point of the rupture?
Mm. I think it was definitely a pattern. I think my own patterns were also revealed. And I also don't think I realized that it was a pattern, and how much I'm playing into it, and this like reenactment, like constant reenactment in our friendship. I realized the impact or the intensity of it, the frequency of it,
Mhm.
until that pandemic episode of it.
Yeah, that sounds tough. So you all never, once she showed up on the FaceTime with her sister, it just never resurfaced except in these, there was no, wow,
What never resurfaced? Which part?
opportunity to talk about whatever
Mm.
was bothering her. That was the purpose, right? Like,
Hmm. Hmm. And I feel it's funny, because when you said, was this a pattern or has she done this with other people? The mutual friends that I am still, our college group of friends that that her and I share mutual friends, everybody know it's this thing that they'll say the person, they're like, oh, so and so, like she does this with everyone. The way I would describe it is like having these little like friendship bouts and fallouts. And I'm not sure if it's because we were so young in college, and at that age you're a mess, and so I guess to a certain level, or to a certain degree, you are willing and okay with dealing and accepting mess until you're not. And I feel like, because not only did we go to UCLA together when we were so young, but when I moved out here to New York, she also moved out here. And I think we were shedding the skin and the versions of ourselves in our 20s. And hell. It was painful for me individually, and I'm sure that can be a lot, and like folks aren't used to it. And I think it was a level of that happening like right before, maybe like 6 months to a year before the pandemic, and then definitely into the pandemic. I also had gotten into the relationship that I'm in now. At that time, I think it was like maybe a couple of years, but that also changes friendships. And so I think me and my ex best friend experienced the things, but didn't talk about the things. Like, I am going to call out Capricorns right now. One thing that I loved about her is that she cares. She's very caring and wants to like make sure that she's like here for you to help you with your problems and all the things, but does not want to do that for her own problems. And she was also not like, I think something that I realized the older I got was, yeah, I can be really extroverted and social and funny and lighthearted, and very much in the same ways be extremely deeply emotional and sensitive. That's something that I learned about myself the older I've gotten.
Yeah.
And I think her and I really, really bonded on the former half of myself that I was just describing, versus the latter half. I think I feel like I that there wasn't space for me to show this newer part of myself that I'm getting used to, or that I know I like genuinely authentically live here.
So it sounds like some of the highlights of the friendship were that you're in this you're relating with a person who cares deeply, similarly to the way that you're saying you care really deeply, and that doesn't feel isolating, and that there's kinship in that. But there are all these other challenges as well to the friendship that you've been able to navigate over the course of years in this space. When you look back on the friendship itself, what do you think led to this place? Like, what what were the little crumbs that you were picking up that, like, did it feel like it was ending before it actually ended for you, or did you feel differently?
I definitely felt differently. I didn't think it was going to end
Mhm.
at all. To be completely honest, I was really blindsided, and I think that's why I was so hurt for so long. If I'm being honest, I
Mhm.
think I still am hurt, because when I was reading over some of the questions, I was like, "Ugh, should I cancel? Like, cough, cough. Like, I don't know if I'm ready to." And then I was like judging myself that I was still having feelings off of this. And I think what was coming up for me was like, when I reflect, we did a lot of trauma bonding. Like, we were
Mhm.
young, right? Like, she
Yeah.
was, I think I was like, I learned and some of my first ways of practicing how to be intimate, how to even engage in conflict, how to still be friends and in a relationship with someone after that. What was with this person? Like,
Mhm.
we spent and experienced and witnessed a lot of like our transitional years together. We lived together in LA when we moved off campus, and we lived together here in New York when she first moved here to New York. I like housed her on my couch for a minute. She knows my family. Like, every time I would go home, my family's always asking about her, and she knew my nieces and nephews. Like, we were very, very close. And now, though, who I am today, if I look back, now that I have language for some of my experiences,
Mm.
I think we were codependent. I think when one of us would try to grow, it felt hard to be friends sometimes.
Mhm. So yeah, that's what I was curious about. Like, there's sometimes we notice patterns in friendship, sometimes we don't, but something is living there, whether it surfaces later, but there are like these little breadcrumbs that get dropped along the way, whether we choose to pick them up or not, is anybody's guess.
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate you naming, like, it was hard to be that person's friend, and that you you're also voluntarily participating in the labor and upkeep of this friendship. And I believe that they were too, based on what you're saying and how much they care. But I'm also hearing that it sounds like you two were growing, but the each other's growth was like bristling or bumping up against like the needs of the friendship.
Yeah,
Sound accurate?
it very much so does sound accurate. And to be honest, when I look back, like I really felt like there were other moments that would have been what broke our friendship up. So when
Mhm.
it was this, it just, I guess it didn't make any sense. It was hard for me to make any meaning of it. Like when I got with my partner, I was like, not that I thought we were going to break up, but I was like, is our friendship going to morph into something else, which I'm totally okay with. Like I honestly believe like when people have kids, like shit just changes. Like you're not going to be able to hang out and like relate and do the things that you wanted to once upon a time.
Yeah.
And that didn't break it. So I think in my mind, my body at the time, I thought like whatever our friendship is going to look like, it's just going to evolve because
Mhm.
I don't have any reasons to not have this person in my life. But also because I've talked about her a lot in therapy and to a number of other friends that I trust.
When you think about how this it's hard to how this situation came to pass, right? It's hard to think about whether or not somebody else is emotionally experiencing the same thing or the same kind of harm or the same kind of feelings. But here at the Bad
Right.
Divorce Podcast, we do believe that harm is co-created and conflict is
Mm-hmm.
co-created. So when you think about and reflect, where do you think your part or where do you think you contributed to the harm of this separation?
I think I wasn't honest at certain points with how I felt. I
Mm,
don't know if I even knew how I felt a lot of the time. I know now, I don't know if I knew this at the time, but I can sometimes have like knee jerk reactions. And then after I process and have time and space away from the knee jerk reaction, I'm like, oh, I actually don't believe that. Like, or think
mm,
that or feel that. Like, what the fuck was that about? I think I did a lot of that. I also am a recovering passive aggressive communicator. My
mm,
family is very, I come from a huge family and they can be very rah rah in your face. And
mhm.
there's no variations of tone. It's just like 0 to 100 real quick.
The direct
And, mm-hmm. Or like having a feeling and being ashamed or being embarrassed or feeling whatever, silly, whatever about the feeling. So instead of just want, but still like wanting to say something. So you're
Mm,
lashing out. And I think that would come up like when we lived together, I would vent to like everybody and their mother but her about some of the things that were driving me crazy because I grew up in a family like where we just didn't talk about conflict. We didn't know we didn't see the importance, the value,
mm,
the the importance and the value of feelings, of knowing your feelings, of being
mm,
emotionally attuned so that you can be in right relationship with other people and just like be able to communicate like
yeah.
so. And I think she very much would do a lot of the same thing. And I think I made a comment earlier about codependency. We did a lot of anticipating each other's like wants and needs versus just like directly speaking to each other.
Mhm.
um
So you can see how that style of growing up with that type of communication, how that translated into your or how that showed itself in the friendship as well. Cause I remember you mentioning like you aren't really honest about the way that you had felt about some things, which sounds very similar to like, this is how we grew up in our
oh, absolutely.
Mhm,
The rumor mills. And it's funny because I remember my therapist, she said in one of my sessions, like you seek out friendships that kind of reflect the relationships of your family or like your origin, what you grew up with. Like that's
mhm,
usually what you tend to. And when I thought about it, I was like, ugh, That is true. Like me, my some certain friend groups would like go to this person to vent to this friend about this friend versus, and yeah, I was like, okay, I guess I'll have to sit with this one.
It's like the choosing of your friends and like the sort of the personalities maybe that they hold.
Mm-hmm.
Like mac and cheese is real comforting. Like walking, taking long walks is really comforting, but drama's comforting to some people too. And
Mm-hmm.
maladaptive patterns can be comforting. Trauma can be comfort. Like all of these things that are not good for us can also be comforting as well. So if you're doing as your therapist is saying, which is pulling people into your orbit who remind you of other people in your orbit, but those other people,
Of
you know,
course.
are bring you problems or are problematic or anything like that, then familiarity blinds you to like
Mm.
what is there. If you think not clearly you understand your from the retrospective, like your communication pattern, like how that played into it. You even labeled at the top of this podcast, like it was a miscommunication, right? But if you could do it all over again, is there anything you would have done differently or no?
Mm. As it relates to this, the one incident or the last most recent fallout or whatever that kind of really ended the friendship,
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't do anything differently there. But if I take a step back and look at our overall friendship, I definitely would have
Mm-hmm.
probably tried to make some of these changes sooner.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that would have made a difference, but I wonder, I feel like when I reflect, it it's one of those friendships where it's like, well, we've been friends for so long. So it's like, what, it's almost like we would never not be friends unless something real egregious happened or whatever. And so, which is weird because this to me isn't really egregious, but
Mm-hmm.
yeah, no.
But it does sort of like pull on that thread that you were talking about earlier about like anticipating each other's needs. But sometimes we don't always get that right. Like I'm guilty of that myself. Like just being like, oh, let me just tiptoe because I don't want to like hurt this person's feelings or they seem to be a certain way. So let me just be over here. And that might not be the right thing. And we don't know what we don't know. So like in the moment, we think we're making the right decision, but really we're just not, like,
Exactly. And I think, and it's so wild because like when I look at a number of my friends, like, yeah, this is the same shit I deal with in my family relationships and also in my own intimate relationship with my partner of like sometimes my feelings, and I do the same thing. Like I sometimes I just can't, I won't, I don't have it in me to sit with the intensity and the depth of this person's feeling, especially if it's an uncomfortable feeling or if it's
mm,
a feeling, a negative feeling that I have played a part in bringing up in that person. And I think that happened a lot in this friendship, like, because we would just get into stuff. And then I think, like, eventually, like, okay, we're done fighting now. Like, I don't know, we would land somewhere because we obviously stayed friends. And I remember out again back to the my mutual group of friends, but they're just like, I can't believe y'all are not friends because at the end of the day, we would have thought y'all would have been the ones to stand the test of time. And it's so funny because she's still friends with a number of the other people that I thought, I can't believe y'all. But yeah, I just was like, no, this is where
mm,
I am at this point in my life.
mm-hmm. Have the you mentioned mutual friends, have the mutuals tried to get you to like back
There,
together?
I don't want to see her. I don't want to see her. I do not want to see her.
Yeah. Past did they when it first happened, were they trying to get you guys were they trying to get
No,
you both to talk?
no, because it was the pandemic, and I think all of us were just trying to hold
Right.
on to ourselves.
Like the rest of us.
And I think sometimes people wouldn't even know. Like they were just surprised.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah. Listen, the pandemic, the lockdown, because technically we're still in a pandemic, but the
mhm,
lockdown shifted people's internal tectonic plates. It just
mm,
really opened people's eyes to certain things, closed people's eyes to certain things. And then on top of that, you have the layer of collective anxiety and depression that people are experiencing, having to be forced to stay
mhm.
still in one place, those of us who were, and the depression and the anxiety of having to go out into the world to work because you didn't have the luxury of staying at home. It was just you get anxiety, you get
Yeah.
anxiety, everybody gets anxiety. So it's like having to try to traverse through normal everyday life with this additional mental health layer that was impacting everyone. I
Mm,
think it's undersold in the narrative of the pandemic and the lockdown. And you can see the ripple effects of that to this day.
absolutely. I had 3 friendship breakups during the pandemic.
Mm.
Well, actually 4 if I count the other one. I was just like, "What is going on? Is it me? Is it me,
Mhm.
Lord? Therapy. Am I
I know
paying
the
you? Like, what?"
drama.
Like, I had a family breakup, like, that was devastating, but that's a glimmer of hope in the light because we recently made up while I was home last
Mm.
month. Because I was like, "Mm-mm, with friends, that's one layer, but with my family, y'all gonna get this, okay?" And I just literally my cousin did a, "Oh, hey," and I haven't spoken to her in 3 years. And
Mm.
I did the, "Oh, hey," back, but when I had her on a one-on-one, I said, "We need to talk," right? And she was like, but we talked and it was fine.
Right.
But yeah, friendship breakups, I didn't realize how traumatic they can be.
Mhm. Yeah, especially for those of us whose friendships are literally our chosen families, like it just feels
Hmm.
so much more disruptive when they do happen, and sometimes they just do. How have you been able to like give yourself grace through this process because it happened 3 years ago, right? And you've had to like live life and try to find a way to heal and or ignore or whatever, like just to get through it. But how were you able to give yourself grace through that process? Or did you struggle with grace?
I think I'm still struggling with grace, if I'm being honest,
Mm.
because I think I get, and this is so how my mom lives in me. It's so annoying and irritating, but I judge myself for how like annoyed I can still be that like this happened because I just was so not, I didn't picture it happening like this, or I guess I'm just like I don't know why it still feels like Groundhog's Day sometimes. I'm like,
Mm.
why are you not over it? And then I have to remind myself, like, I'm a therapist. Like,
Mhm.
sometimes people just don't get over certain things. Like, they are still processing or need to feel the fullness of whatever it is. I'll be like, well, shit, I thought I felt the fullness. I'm done. Like,
Yeah. And it also impacts or brushes up against, I should say, how you experience need or don't need closure, like how you exit situations in your life will impact like whether or not you get a sense of like, well, this still doesn't feel over for me and I don't know why, right? And so
mhm,
there are people who walk this world who are like, well, it's over and that's that, and they can walk right out the door and never think twice about you again. My mom is like that. She's like a Pisces true and through, and she
mm,
like is once she's done with someone, it takes her a while, but once she's done, she like it's like the person never existed. So I'm not built like that. But
mhm.
actually, no, that's not true. It depends on the situation. There's been several people that I've had to be like, okay, you cannot exist in my space. What did Cardi say? Rent free with light and water included.
Mm,
what she said in her new song Jealousy.
And technically, I could. I think if you think about it, I could get closure,
Yeah.
right? Because she reached out and was like, "Do you want to talk?" But I am a person of principle. And
Mhm.
one thing you're not going to do is continue to gaslight me. And
Mm.
just the air of like 3 years later,
Yeah.
now you want to talk? And
Mhm.
you're still approaching this in a way of like, I don't know, I got the air of like nothing ever happened or whatever. But again, I could have just been in my feelings or being triggered or what have you. And something in my gut is just saying like meeting is not going to change your feelings. It's not going to, I don't know if we can come back from this. Like you
Mhm.
just are not meant to be friends with this person.
Mhm. That's a hard thing to make peace with if you shared lots of love and care the way that you describe with
I
this.
don't think I have made peace with it, to be honest. I think
Mhm.
I find peace in talking about it because at least I feel like peace to me is like not having these types of reactions still.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm clearly still hurt.
Mhm.
So I'm just trying to hold space for my hurtness. I think the more the less I get irritated, the more I'll be able to deal with.
Mhm. Except when when I was like, "Are your mutuals trying to get you?" You were like, "I don't want to. I don't want to see her." I was like, "Oh, okay." But it
Mm-hmm.
was clear to me that like there's still some exposed like nerve endings, right? There's just some sensitivities there, which there's no shade and there's no judgment here about that because we move through life the way we move through life. It just is. And I'm just curious about like what do you think is the thing that's like keeping you from like transcending this or moving to the other side of it where you don't have the hurt or the pain, right? To your point, people just there are just things that we hold that connect us that we just don't get over. And that is a thing. But what do you think is the thing for you that might be preventing some of that grace and healing work that you talked about struggling through?
Mm. It's so funny because I feel like this came up in therapy today, but just like I really want someone to change this one thing. If you just change this one thing, we'll be good. And it's like, this is who this person is.
Mm,
And not the negative, not like a negative thing, but like sometimes I feel like my partner talks to me in code and I really fucking hate it. But he knows, like, he's like, but you know what I mean by the code. And I'm like, but just talk to me in regular. And it's like, but why do I have to get so caught there? I get stuck there
mm,
versus just like knowing that this is another way of this person talk. I just get really, really stuck there. I'm sure that has to do with like control or like power or whatever. But I believe in my heart and in my body that she has not changed. And
mm,
so that is what gets in the way of me. I assume this, I feel this way because of ways in which I know how she's showing up. Like a friend will tell me, oh, so because last summer we had another mutual friend visiting and she had hung out with this my ex best friend. And then I hung out with her the next day and she was like, oh, well, so and so told me that nothing, she's good. Like she was like, oh, I have nothing against Vileti. Like if she were here, I'd be totally fine. Like it's all love.
mm.
And that just grinds my gears. It's one thing that
Mm.
I can't stand. It just feels very fake and phony. Like, what the fuck does that even mean? It's all love. We haven't spoken about anything.
Right.
Like, what are you talking about? And then I look like the crazy person because I'm very emotive and expressive. And
Mhm.
you gonna get these feelings. You are. You are.
Listen, I can empathize with that. The sense that something is not entirely true about a person's disposition.
Yes.
Like you're saying, your mouth is saying this, but your actions are communicating an entirely different set of circumstances. And I'm not buying what you're selling. And just being able to that can feel isolating. That can feel like you're the mad one who's like seeing these things that aren't there. But if you've known the person a long time and you have built a good relationship with them, you've gotten to know their quirks, then for you, it's for someone like you, it's easy to spot. but then you have to hold on to it, right? Because other people might not see it either. It can be
Mhm.
isolating. It can be all the things, angering, enraging, all
Mhm.
of those things. What words of advice would you, or encouragement would you have for your younger self, the person who went through this, the person who's different than the person who's with us today on the podcast around this situation?
Mm. I would encourage her to read the quote that she put on her wall in her room that she was living at in Harlem and actually try to practice what that looks like and feels like every day. And the quote said, "Speak even when your voice quivers."
Mm,
And I think, like I said earlier, there were so many times where I bit my tongue, or there were times where, like, I just let it slide because I thought it wasn't a big deal until it was a big deal.
mm-hmm.
I think I would have encouraged my younger past self to feel comfortable, or at least try, just give it a try, about like practicing saying what you need, or practicing asking for consent and giving consent. Cause I feel like we were so close that, like, we would just do things like, I don't know, she would sometimes do unannounced things here and there. And like I just had a hard time speaking up for myself. Like, but
Mm-hmm.
I would speak up for myself passive aggressively after the fact.
Mm-hmm.
And so I feel like I would have I would have encouraged or invited my younger self to just say the thing, even though it feels so scary.
It makes me think about grieving, right? And how we are grieving these relationships that we've lost. Like, we're not just and grieving doesn't have a timeline.
Mm-mm.
Even though people are like 5 steps of grief, I'm like, yes, and those steps are not linear. Like, you can jump between any number of those steps at any given point in a day, month, or year. And because grieving has no timeline, you can be in that loop for a minute.
Yeah.
So it's I can hear that you're grieving, but I also hear that you're like, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel too.
Yeah, I can. So I'll hold on to that bit of hope.
Well, there you have it. The full depth of emotion and vulnerability present for your learning and growth. We got to hear how this friendship not only fell apart, but still has connective tissue with existing co-friends. Sometimes it can be difficult to get space from a BFD, especially in our interconnected world. More to the point, though, we heard about the ways in which a lack of accountability can not only be infuriating, but it can give you the right push to put your foot down and hold the line. Your boundaries cannot be porous in your healing process. But we'd love to hear from you. What did you think about our conversation with Vileti? Would you try to maintain friendships with those who remain in contact with your ex-BFF? Or would you just cut everybody off? Sound off via email or voice note at bfdpod@gmail.com. As always, thank you for being here and listening. We hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we explore how the time we spend cultivating a friendship can be destroyed quicker than you can say BFD. But before you go, here's a snippet from the rest of Vileti and I's conversation.
Like friendship breakups, I feel like it wasn't a thing for me, or I didn't really talk about them until I became a 30-something-year-old.
With the shoulder shimmy and everything, like 30 something. I love that.
Yeah,
But
it sounds better than an actual number, right?
hear more when you join the Divorce Party, our Patreon community, and follow us on IG and X, formerly known as Twitter, at BF Divorce Pod. See you soon.